Welcome back to the Knife Studio. In this video, I'm going to start my first ever stiletto. I was inspired to make a stiletto by Black Dragon Forge. He's been making a bunch of really cool ones with 3-edged blades. I'm not doing that style blade. We're going to do a double-edged blade that's long and skinny, so it's going to be a little bit like a dagger, but also very stiletto-y because of how skinny and long the blade's going to be. We gave you guys on YouTube 3 options for my next project, and that's why I'm doing the stiletto. And I'm really glad you guys picked that, by the way, because that's the project I wanted to do the most. I'm also going to be using carbon fiber for the handle on this, which is unusual for me. I normally use like mammoth ivory and natural materials and stuff. I'm really excited to use the carbon fiber because I think it's going to be absolutely gorgeous. We're going to do a fluted handle, and it's going to have some 24 karat wire wrap in the handle. I started on this project 1 day ago, and I want to catch you up on what I've done so far. We had a huge malfunction with our memory chip in the camera and completely lost yesterday's footage. So all I've done so far was took one of these leftover pieces of mosaic Damascus from a project I did a couple years ago. I had a really big piece. I took the mosaic piece, cut it up into 3 smaller angled pieces, forge welded those together, and then drew this out into what's going to be our stiletto blade. I also surface ground it real quick and normalized it. Other than that, that's all I've done. I've only spent 1 day on it, and like I said, we'd be showing you that, but we lost the footage completely. It's gone. It was sad because I'm actually doing the intro all over again right now. We're gonna do a cool armor piercing tip on the blade, and that's just where the hollow grinding will stop, and there'll be a little bit of a flat grind. It'll make the tip a little bit thicker and stronger since it's gonna be so long and skinny. And then we're gonna do a really deep fuller in the blade too. So with this knife, there's gonna be a whole lot of facets and angles and curves and stuff going on, so I didn't want the Damascus to be like the main star. I just wanted it to be something like, when you see it from across the room, you're like, oh, that's a cool knife, and then you walk up to it and you're like, oh wow, that's a really fine mosaic Damascus pattern. That's what I chose on this, so it's a really fine pattern. I also really forged it out a lot to kind of get that pattern to stretch. Normally I don't want distortion too much, but this time I actually wanted it to kind of distort because of the way the pattern is. You'll end up seeing later, it's got some little X's going on in it, and since I really stretched it out, those X's kind of get drawn out as you go down the blade, and it should be a really cool look on the final knife. I ended up having quite a bit of Damascus, so I forged out the blade a couple inches longer than what I drew. I drew a 10-inch blade, and this thing's almost 12 inches long, but I'm not sure if I'm gonna keep that. I might cut it off and make it 10 inches. I don't know how long I really want it. I kept the piece really thick for our blade as well. It's almost 3/8 of an inch thick, and that's because I'm planning on doing a really deep hollow grind for the edge, super deep hollow grind, and we're gonna have tons of distal taper on it. So back here it'll be pretty thick, but then it'll taper down to really thin by the time you get to the tip. What you're seeing right here is where the hollow grinding stops. I think I'll have it right around here somewhere, and then the rest of the blade will be flat ground, and that'll make the blade a little thicker at the tip than it would have been if we hollow ground all the way to the tip. This blade is normalized, ready for a little bit of grinding, and then we can jump right into heat treating it. I'm only gonna do a little bit of rough shaping before heat treating, just because it's such a long, skinny blade. I'll do most of the grinding after heat treating. I'm gonna just profile it a little bit, and then we'll go ahead and stick it in the heat treating oven, get this thing heated up to 1500 degrees, and harden it. "20 minutes later. Stuck the blade in there, let it heat up and let it soak at temperature, 1525 degrees for about 12 minutes now. It's about to be 13, normally go about 10, should be fine. You want to agitate it a lot when you're heat treating, otherwise it might not cool down fast enough and might not fully harden. Agitate it up and down, don't swirl it around sideways. If you're putting a lot of side pressure on it, you might end up warping it really badly. A little bit warped.
What's the Windex for?
Just to see how hot it is and cool it down. Definitely got nice and hard. There's a tiny bit of decarb on the outside, but that's just from soaking it for 10 minutes. Once you get through that, nice solid hard blade. Hopefully there won't be any weird cracks or horrible warpage or anything. Now that the blade's hardened, I'm gonna let this heat treating oven cool down, and then we're gonna temper the blade at probably about 425 degrees for a couple hours, and we'll be ready to move on to grinding after that.
The next day.
The blade tempered, I left it in the oven for a few hours at 425 degrees. I've also profiled the blade and cleaned it up on the surface grinder. Then I spent about 2 hours cleaning off the vise that was mounted to here and getting the table all smoothed out and mounting the blade onto the table, right down to the table. It took me forever because the blade's tapered and it was really hard to get it parallel with the table, but I used a wobbler, spent lots of time, got it all set up. We've got a 3/16 inch high carbide milling bit in here, ball end nose, and we're gonna mill this fuller in the hardened steel blade. Got the speed cranked up all the way to 2,900 RPM, it's as fast as it'll go, and we can start cutting this fuller in. There's one side done. I gotta clean this off and flip it over. Get it centered up and parallel with the table again. I cut the tang part 5/1000ths of an inch deeper than the blade area. And that's just so hopefully it'll be a little easier for me to fit the tang up. I'll have 5/1000ths of an inch to play with on each side. I just got done cutting the fuller in the Stiletto. I ended up using a 3/16 inch diameter carbide ball end bit. Turned the speed up on the milling machine to like 3,000 RPM, and we cut it in about 93 thousandths of an inch deep. Just over 93, went to 95. That left me with about 125 thousandths thick area in the middle that's untouched. And it's important that we had that much thickness left because the tang isn't gonna end up needing to be thinned down quite a bit in order to fit the guard onto the fuller the way I'm wanting to. I might end up doing something different, but I'm planning on having the guard fit up the entire fuller so there won't be a gap here. But I could end up making it fit over it and have it be more of a traditional style fuller where it disappears into the guard. And the next thing I'm gonna do is start hand sanding the fuller. right now it doesn't matter if we kind of round over this radius because we're gonna grind the bevels in really deep later, and we're gonna end up taking a little bit of material off where the fuller meets the blade bevel. So later on, it'll crisp those up if we end up rounding it off now. But if I did all the sanding later, after that's ground in, we might round off those crisp lines where the fuller is just a little bit, and then we wouldn't be able to get them crisped back up because all the grinding and stuff would be done by that point. I looked around the shop for a while and found this brass rod that I do my brass rod test with. It's just over 3/16 of an inch, so I turned it down on the lathe with a file just a little bit on the end and made it just under 3/16. That way the thickness of the sandpaper would be taken into account. I bent the handle up on a little bit of an angle so I could have something to hold on to. And then I'm just gonna sit here just like this. Push this thing back and forward in the fuller. I'll use some Windex to lubricate it. And then whenever you wanna move to a fresh piece of paper, you just gotta roll it up a little bit and you'll have a brand new piece of paper there. And go to town sanding this fuller. I'm gonna try starting with 320 grit, but if that doesn't work, then I'll probably switch down to 220 and go up from there.
2,000 years later.
After a couple hours, I got the fuller hand sanded. Went ahead and went up to 600 grit, just so we won't have to do a ton of hand sanding later and we can keep everything nice and crisp as possible later. Scribe some lines on there about 30 thousandths of an inch apart, and that's gonna be a good starting place for me to grind this edge down to. So the next step is just to take it over to the grinder and start hollow grinding this thing. I don't know what wheel I'm gonna use. I'm gonna play around with a couple different wheels and try to get a really deep hollow grind. Hey, also guys, leave a comment below. Wish my mom happy birthday. Today is her birthday, and she does so much behind the scenes that you guys have no idea about and makes everything actually work around here. Enables me to make knives, and Josh to do videos, and Dad to make knives and videos and stuff. Mom's behind the scenes, kind of keeping everything going. So wish her a happy birthday. It's today. I just got done roughing in 2 of the 4 bevels, and I only did 1 bevel on each side of the knife because I thought I might want to scribe some more lines on there, so I left a little bit of a flat area. Okay, so
Delicious.
the next thing I need to do is finish grinding these other 2 bevels, and then we can move on to final grinding. And it is going to be a chore to grind this thing. Just rough grinding so far was pretty hard, but we have a lot of finish grinding we're going to need to do. And I'm trying to go for a really thin edge here, plus the fact that it's a super deep hollow grind and that it's such a skinny blade, all combined together to make this thing pretty challenging to grind. Thank you guys for watching me work on my first ever stiletto. And be sure to stay tuned for the next video where we're gonna see if I can actually make this into a nice blade or if I'll ruin it on the grinder. I'll see all you guys in the next video. Bye-bye. I love that one. I don't even want to redo it. Is it good?
It was perfect.
Stop.
Why? What's up, Dad?
Because it's ridiculous.
Well, that's gonna get us demonetized.
Yeah.